August 9, 1943. A face stares out from newsstands across America. Time magazine cover story. Terry Allen praised as a great division commander in the making, gaining 2 days personal luster with each Omar Bradley had fired him. But there's a problem. Think about that timing. A terrible, twisted August 7th, fired. By the time August that 9th, magazine hit celebrated as a Terry Allen on the cover of Time unemployed. Allen had just captured Trona in one of the bloodiest engagements of the Sicilian campaign. His 1st Infantry Division had won every major battle in North Africa and Sicily. His men had stopped a German panzer counterattack that could have pushed the entire Allied invasion back into the sea. And Bradley sent him home in disgrace. For discipline problems, for not making his men salute properly. Now Allen was on a transport ship, headed back to the United States, while American newsstands celebrated him as one of the Army's best combat leaders. Bradley had just relieved the general America was calling a hero. That's not a good look. But it was about to get worse for Bradley, because George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, was watching. And Marshall was about to give Terry Allen something Bradley never expected, a second chance. Terry Allen arrived at West Point in 1907 with military service in his blood. 4 generations of his family had worn the uniform. His father was an Army colonel. His grandfather had fought at Gettysburg. But Allen was different from the polished cadets around him. He had severe dyslexia that made reading agonizing. He compensated by memorizing everything, but academic work was a constant struggle. He failed out of West Point twice. Most men would have taken the hint. The Army didn't want them. Find another career. Move on. Allen enrolled at Catholic University in Washington, completed ROTC, and entered the Army as a commissioned officer through the back door in 1912. The regular Army officers looked down on him. He wasn't one of them. He hadn't earned his commission the proper way. Allen didn't care. He was exactly where he wanted to be. World War I turned Terry Allen into a legend among enlisted men and a headache for his superiors. He commanded an infantry battalion at age 30. He led patrols personally into no man's land when regulations said battalion commanders should stay behind the lines. A machine gun bullet tore through his jaw during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Most officers would have accepted the medical evacuation. Allen talked the doctors into sending him back to his unit before the wound fully healed. He showed up at the front line, still bleeding. His men didn't know whether to be inspired or concerned. They settled on both. His superiors found him impossible. He drank too much. He ignored regulations he thought were stupid. He treated military ceremony as a waste of time that could be spent training. But he won. Every engagement his battalion fought ended in American victory. Then George Marshall noticed him. By 1940, Lieutenant Colonel Terry Allen was being chewed out by his regimental commander and facing possible court-martial for yet another incident. Then a telegram arrived. Allen had been promoted to brigadier general, skipping the permanent rank of colonel entirely. George Marshall had personally intervened. Combat leaders, the Army Chief of Staff was rebuilding the military. Marshall wrote he knew Allen was outstanding as a leader who could do anything with men and officers, though unprepossessing in appearance and apparently casual in manner. Other generals thought Marshall was insane. Allen was a drunk and a troublemaker who had failed out of West Point twice. But Marshall saw something else. He saw a man who understood that wars were won by soldiers who would follow their commander anywhere, not soldiers who could march in straight lines. In May 1942, Marshall gave Allen command of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. It was one of the most coveted assignments in the Army. Allen was about to meet the man who would try to destroy Major General Omar Bradley was everything Terry Allen was not. Bradley had graduated from West Point. He was methodical, careful, and obsessed with proper military procedure. He believed discipline and order were the foundations of an effective fighting force. When Bradley took command of 2nd Corps in North Africa, he inherited Allen's 1st Division. What he saw appalled him. The soldiers of the Big Red One didn't salute properly. Their uniforms were dirty, they brawled in rear area towns, and treated military police as enemies rather than authority figures. Bradley wrote that Allen's division had left a trail of looted wine shops and outraged mayors across North Africa. Here's what Bradley didn't write about. When German panzers attacked at Kasserine Pass and American units collapsed in panic, Allen's division held. When 2nd Corps needed to counterattack, Allen's men led the assault. Bradley admitted that none excelled the unpredictable Terry Allen in the leadership of troops. But he said it through gritted teeth. Think about what Bradley was really saying. Allen was the best combat leader in the Corps, but his men didn't salute properly. And to Bradley, that mattered more. Allen started training his division in night operations. Not the standard 8 to 12 hours per week the Army required. More like 30 to 35 hours. His men practiced moving in complete darkness. They learned to navigate by compass and stars. They rehearsed attacks until they could execute them without speaking. The results were immediate. At El Getter, Allen's night assaults caught German units completely off guard. Bradley watched Allen's victories pile up. The discipline problems continued, and so did Bradley's determination to do something about them. July 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. George Patton commanded the American 7th Army. Bernard Montgomery commanded the British 8th Army. Patton specifically requested Allen's 1st Division for the most difficult landing at Gela. He knew Allen's men could handle it. They landed on July 10th. Within hours, German panzers from the Hermann Göring Division counterattacked with 90 tanks, trying to push the Americans back into the sea. Allen's division stopped them. Bradley later made an extraordinary admission. He questioned whether any other division could have repelled that charge in time to save the beach. Let that sink in. Bradley, the man who would fire Allen, admitted that Allen's division might have been the only unit capable of saving the Sicilian invasion. But Allen wasn't satisfied with just holding the beach. He pushed inland, aggressively, cracking the German defensive center. His troops were exhausted, casualties mounted. Allen drove them harder. On August 6th, after 6 days of brutal fighting, Allen's division captured the town of Troina. It was one of the bloodiest engagements of the Sicilian campaign. The victory at Troina should have been Allen's crowning moment. Instead, on August 7, 1943, Terry Allen received orders to report to 2nd Corps headquarters. Bradley was waiting for him. The conversation was brief. Allen was relieved of command of the 1st Infantry Division. The official reason: discipline problems. Bradley said Allen had become too much of an individualist to submerge himself in the group undertakings of war. Allen was stunned. His division had just captured Troina. They had won every major engagement in North Africa and Sicily. Now he was being sent home for not making his men salute properly. He didn't know that Time magazine had already sent their August 9th issue to print, with his face on the cover. He didn't know that while he sailed home in disgrace, American newsstands would be celebrating him as one of the Army's best combat leaders. All he knew was that his career was over. George Patton was furious when he learned what Bradley had done. Patton and Allen had argued constantly. They insulted each other over tactics and leadership styles. They were not friends, but Patton recognized what Allen had built. And Patton had no patience for generals who cared more about salutes than victories. When Eisenhower gave a lecture criticizing the poor discipline of Allen's division, Patton interrupted him in front of the entire staff. He told Eisenhower he was mistaken and that no one whips a dog before putting him into a fight. It didn't matter. Eisenhower backed Bradley's decision. Allen was finished. Allen boarded a transport ship back to the United States. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like a man whose heart had been cut out. At 55 years old, the Army had told him he was obsolete. He didn't know that George Marshall was watching. October 15, 1943. Terry Allen stood before a formation of soldiers at Camp Adair, Oregon. These weren't the battle-hardened veterans of the Big Red One. These were draftees and recent enlistees who had never heard a shot fired in anger. The 104th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Timberwolves. George Marshall had intervened again. Just 2 months after Bradley declared Allen unfit to command, Marshall gave him a 2nd Division. 2 months. Bradley fires the guy, and Marshall hands him another division, before the paperwork is dry. Marshall's message was clear. He didn't care what Bradley thought. He didn't need a diplomat. He needed a brawler. Allen looked at the raw troops in front of him and saw potential. He would build this division from nothing. He would train them in the tactics that had terrified Germans in North Africa and Sicily. And he would prove that Bradley had made the worst personnel decision of the war. The training began that afternoon. While standard divisions trained for daylight, the Timberwolves lived in the dark. They learned to move without flashlights. They practiced hand signals that worked when voices would give away positions. They rehearsed attacks until every soldier knew exactly where to be without being told. The Timberwolves adopted a motto: "Nothing in hell must stop the Timberwolves." By August 1944, they were ready. Allen loaded his division onto transport ships bound for France. He was going back to war. The 104th Division entered combat on October 23, 1944. His Timberwolves advanced 15 miles in 5 days through flooded lands that stalled other divisions. Montgomery himself sent congratulations. Then they hit the Siegfried Line. Concrete pillboxes, dragon's teeth, interlocking fields of fire. Other divisions had bled themselves white, attacking these defenses in daylight. Allen's men attacked at night, again and again. Stolberg fell, then Eschweiler, then Indentown, after town. Captured in darkness while German defenders struggled to organize resistance against enemies they couldn't see. The Germans started calling the 104th the Night Fighters. Prisoners told interrogators that fighting them was unfair. They couldn't see the Americans coming. By spring 1945, Allen's division had crossed the Rhine and was racing toward the Elbe. They had become exactly what Allen promised Marshall, the most feared night fighting unit in the European theater. Then they found Norbethausen. April 11, 1945, a concentration camp. 3,000 corpses lay in the open. 750 survivors, emaciated, sick, dying. For 6 months, the Timberwolves had owned the night. But at Nordhausen, they stared into a different kind of darkness, the darkness of the human soul. April 26, 1945, the 104th Division reached the Mulde River and made contact with Soviet forces. The war in Europe was effectively over. Allen's Timberwolves had fought for 195 consecutive days. They had never yielded ground. They had never failed to take an objective. Omar Bradley never admitted he was wrong about Terry Allen, but George Marshall's judgment had been vindicated. The troublemaker who failed out of West Point twice had built the most feared night fighting unit in the European theater. Individualism wins wars.